Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Masculine Wilderness podcast. I'm your host, Tom Perez. I'm the founder and CEO of Epic Project. The Masculine Wilderness is an ongoing conversation about how we can show up in the world as men in the healthiest version of ourselves. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. We cannot do that in a vacuum, and we cannot do that without really amazing women walking the journey with us. And today is no exception. I get to introduce one such woman who has become a great friend. I don't even remember, Helen, how long ago it was. It seems like a lifetime in this work, but Helen Taylor is with us today, and she is a vice president of Exodus Cry. That's the generic.
At Exodus.
Of Impact. Yes. Okay.
Grandiose.
Sounds very dramatic, but welcome, Helen. I'm so glad you're here. I want our listeners to hear a little bit about you. Before we do that, though, I also want to say because this is how Helen and I roll, we're going to probably talk about some difficult issues and subjects and stories. And so if any of this feels like it's becoming triggering for you, we want you to just take care of yourself as a listener and hit pause. Take a deep breath, go for a walk outside, and then re-engage whenever you feel ready. But the work we do together is hard, but my friend Helen Taylor is tough. So, Helen, tell us about yourself.
Oh, well, thank you, Tom. And I think I was trying to remember the other day when I saw Justin, when it was that my path first crossed with you two. And I think I remember first hearing about you in around 2014 when we were doing backpage outreach, texting. And then I heard about these couple of guys from Portland, Oregon, who were doing the reverse side of that and reaching out to the sex buyers. But yeah, well, I got involved in this work back in like 2007 and 2008. I first found out about the scope of trafficking and went to Cambodia while I was at university, ended up training as an art therapist after college and moved back to Cambodia, worked as an art therapist there, and joined Exodus Cry almost 12 years ago. 12 years ago in January. So definitely seen this work from a lot of different angles, lanes, international perspectives, and it's such a joy and honor to do this work. It feels, just without being cliche, one of the most immense privileges of my life that I get to wake up each day and do something that I love so much and a cause that I believe is so critical and important. And not every person gets to love the work that they do. So I feel very grateful that I do.
Yeah, I'm grateful that you're here. So we actually met as opposed to virtually meeting in Kansas City, and you definitely have a Midwest accent. You are from the UK. So I want to just go back a little bit to when you were at university, and then like the decision to do art therapy, was that because of something you experienced or witnessed when you were in Cambodia that first time? Or like, what was the inciting incident that got you into this, that said, I can't not do something? What was that moment for you early on?
Well, I think it's interesting, like the longer you're on the planet, the longer you're in this work, you begin to connect the dots and almost go back further and see that it didn't just randomly happen in a vacuum, that there were things that led to me making that decision. And for me, I think the earliest memory I have of even finding out what prostitution was when I was 11 years old. My dad would take me shopping in London. I think he was thinking his daughter, his only child, was about to become a teenager and how to invest in some quality time with her. So message for any dads out there, you can't go wrong if you take your daughter shopping. And I really wasn't a spoiled brat.
Do we have to go to London? Do we have to take our daughters all the way to London?
That is a plus, Oxford Street.
Okay.
But really anywhere, my dad was just wanting to set aside quality time to have a whole day with me doing something that was interesting to me. And I was very aware that a lot of girls' dads did not want to take them clothes shopping. So he made me feel very special on these shopping trips. But something that my dad would just always do whenever he'd walk past a red telephone box in certain pockets of London, a little bit less so now, but back then you'd see them lined with postcards advertising prostitution. And something that he would just always do on his general walks about London anyway, he always picks up trash if it's in front of him. He always stops for the homeless. If there's someone in front of him and an opportunity to make the world a better place, he is one of those people who always pauses and makes that time. But he would go into these telephone boxes, tear down all the postcards, throw them away and say, just express how it did not feel okay with him that women were advertised like pizzas for sale in a telephone box. And he was aware that these postcards might all get put up a week later, but if he could stop one man from making one phone call, it was worth it to him. So from age 11, I was going into these telephone boxes with him, taking down these postcards, and
wow.
I'm very aware now that a lot of girls grow up with their fathers watching porn, whereas my dad was tearing it down, but not from a place of judgment of the women, but from a place of, I'm a father and these girls are daughters and real women, and they're being exploited and commodified in these telephone boxes. And so I remember playing in my backyard as a young teen, and I'd be picturing those postcards and imagining the lives of those women. And I remember even like praying for them and just feeling a seed of deep compassion, trying to imagine what their life would be like, trying to imagine what led a woman to be in that kind of postcard. And then when I was 16, I was in London again by myself and took a wrong turn, found myself down this alleyway that had a peep show, a strip club, and some adult stores. It was not really a red light district, but a micro expression of one. And there was this woman wearing a red dress standing in the doorway of what I realized was a brothel of sorts. And she was waiting for men to come in. And the look on her face was really haunting to me. She didn't look British. She looked Eastern European or Russian. And she was just kind of rocking a little bit, leaning on the door. And the first emotion I felt was this real anger, like, what is wrong with the world that we allow any woman to be in that situation of such vulnerability? Like, I pictured myself, I could be this mean, misogynistic, violent, awful man with very ill intentions. And just because I have some money in my pocket, it gives me this power and agency to purchase her consent and silence her and have like rent her body. Like I didn't have that exact language, but that was how I understood it. Like the power dynamics were so unequal.
And you were 16.
16, yeah.
Wow.
And the reason I know all this is because, well, firstly, I remember this moment, and the next thought I had was, I just want to buy her a rose. And so I went looking for a florist, and for the next 20 minutes, I was searching, but I was feeling really emotional at this time. I was like, tears were running down my face, and I was just trying to find a florist because I wanted to give her a rose as a symbol of, I see you, and your value and humanity is so clear to me. You are beautiful. You are my sister. That was my heart posture. I'd never heard of it, giving roses to people in the sex trade. Now I get to do it here in the States, all around the world, meet them in the sex trade in that way. But I couldn't find a florist. And so I just got on the train and I had my journal with me, and I just was writing about this in my journal through tears. And found that journal entry a few years ago. And it was really meaningful to me to read back that experience, because 4 years later at university was when I really found out about the global scope of trafficking and what was happening in Cambodia. And so my college degree was in English literature, art history, and fine art. So it was before the days when there was anything related to outreach or human trafficking to learn at school. But I trained as an art therapist after college, got a diploma to do that, just a basic diploma as a means of using art as an additional way to unlock trauma. A lot of survivors, talk therapy isn't the most successful means of healing. And for some of them, they can't even put words to the trauma they've experienced, but they can put color to it or draw a memory, and that can unlock some of the memories that until then they haven't been able to speak about. So in 2011 and 12, I was living in Cambodia, but even working in the aftercare space, my heart was always drawn to the girls still at the brothels. And so I would go and buy cookies at a local little grocery store and just go and hand them out to the girls just as an excuse to talk with them and sit with them and try and tell them about our program in a way that didn't get them into trouble in any way. And so then when I moved here, it was primarily to work in outreach. And so for the first 8 years, was wherever the sex trade existed, on the streets, strip clubs, illicit massage parlors, porn conventions, jail, on the internet, was a major way that we would try and reach any woman in the sex trade to let them know that there was a way out if they wanted it, and that we would be a trusted source to support them and help them with that journey out.
That is, and this is, I know this to be true of you. I've seen you in these settings like you described, and there's such a courage and determination that you bring when you show up to do this work. What I love, and I don't know that I've heard like this full story. I've gathered bits and pieces over the years, but that seed was planted in you when you were 11. Like you, and I have not met your dad. I hope I do someday. I really do.
I hope so too.
But he was acting in good conscience. It seems like it wasn't like it was part of some highly developed plan that he was executing with you as a witness. He was just being who he was in that moment and doing what he felt led to do. And that obviously triggered something in you. And I think for a lot of guys that I talk to, the issue, like we've said, is really difficult and heavy. And I think a lot of men feel like there's not a lot that they can do. But your dad blows that theory right out of the water. Show up wherever you are as a man, and act with integrity and conviction. And I do think he was even aware how much you were paying attention in that moment.
I don't know, but he's just always himself in that way. I grew up with him taking mentally ill and disabled folks from an old people's home. I don't know what they're called over here in England. We call them an old people, or I did growing up at least. He would drive them in a minibus to our church every Sunday. And so I just grew up with that, with compassion being modeled, with service being modeled. My dad was the first one who told me about William Wilberforce, and that he was the British campaigner and politician who saw the transatlantic slave trade abolished. And years later, me and my dad went around London to every house that Wilberforce ever lived in, because they have these little blue plaques.
Oh, wow.
I do think there's such a beautiful lesson in that. The small things that you do, your children notice and pick up on, and you're sowing the seeds just by showing up in ways that are authentic and selfless and demonstrating compassion. And as men, the influence that you have over your daughters, over your sons, over your families is huge. And not meant to put that pressure or intimidate, but I think that's a very empowering.
Well, I feel like as a man, it is empowering and encouraging, because what that story communicates to me as a man is I don't have to set out to do something grand or heroic, like ahead of time, premeditated. It's just, hey, I see a situation and I'm responding out of my heart and my conviction. Yeah. And doggone it, if my daughter didn't see the whole thing, and now look what's happened. So I want to fast forward from that scene. So you with your dad pulling those little things out of the phone boxes in London to Figaro Avenue, Super Bowl week. What was that, 2021? 22? Yeah. Okay, let's 22, whenever the Super Bowl was at SoFi Stadium in LA. So here, what is that, like 20 some years later? Can you describe, I was not there, but Justin, one of our teammates here, and some other volunteers were together with you on the Blade, I think as they call it in LA. Tell us what that was all about.
Yeah, well, just to even set the context a little bit, because people often ask about the Super Bowl and these sporting events. And so trafficking happens every day, year round. It's not just during the Super Bowl that women are sold by the masses in LA and on that street, Figaro. We often do these intentional big outreaches around Super Bowls, the World Cup and the Olympics in the last 12 years. I've led teams to Brazil, to Russia, and to various Super Bowl cities. And our heart is always to work alongside and empower the organizations who are there on the ground, who are doing tireless work throughout the year. There's something about mobilization around these sporting events that it's really a great opportunity. And of course, demand spikes anywhere where there's an anticipated or expected influx of men. So sporting events, and the Super Bowl being the biggest football event in America. But the reason, because I still meet people who don't quite connect the dots. A lot of traffickers bring their women in from neighboring cities across state lines into that city. So during the Super Bowl week, we were talking to women who'd been brought down from San Francisco in buses, from Nevada, Las Vegas, from Atlanta. And the traffickers anticipate there will be more money to be made. So that is why there is an anticipated spike in trafficking. At least online, they expect that. It doesn't always mean that there is the data around that.
Right.
But LA is one of the most intense cities to do outreach in, partly because on this one road, there are all these side roads that are called, build up to be John Jams, is what they call them, that essentially feel like these drive-through lines of about 10 cars lining up with the girls on the corner. And there's a lot of gang-controlled forced prostitution happening, with different blocks being run by different gangs who drive different colored cars. And sometimes it's not even safe for us to get out of the car, but I really prefer doing walking outreach, where you're walking, approaching the women, not jumping out of a van, even though I've done outreaches and it's sometimes the safest place to do an outreach is from a white van. But you can imagine if a door gets pulled open and 5 people jump out, I've seen girls run away from that.
I probably would too.
Right. So we walk up. We don't have a big group. There's usually just the 2 girls and then a guy as security, sort of hanging back, being our eyes and ears, situational awareness. And we always approach with a gift. There's a proverb that says a gift opens the way. And it's really an icebreaker, partly for volunteers to be able to have an opening of conversation, because starting a conversation out of thin air can be a bit awkward. And so the gift is partly for us to eliminate that awkwardness. It's like, this is the reason and excuse for us approaching you. We've got a gift and you're describing what's in the gift bag. And also that every woman we encounter, whether our conversation with her is 30 seconds or 30 minutes, we're able to leave her with a tangible symbol of we care about her. That is the message we want a gift to send. Like, we care about you. Our contact information is there, some resources, a generous gift,
Yeah.
Waking up at Christmas when you're a kid and you open a stocking that's full of little gifts. And I always want that to be the feeling, not just like, hotel freebie shampoo type of gifts, like really.
Right.
And not every nonprofit is able to do that. So I think any gift is better than no gift. But we've seen a lot of interesting breakthroughs in Super Bowls where there's increased law enforcement stings. There's women who are making that decision to exit that week, and we're able to connect them with an aftercare program. And we have programs with empty beds on call, kind of inner city triage. And that was a great opportunity partnering with you guys at Epic for that week.
Well, describing just the jammed up traffic all along that stretch, that was the thing that was so sobering and heartbreaking, because while you're there attempting to care for the women that are being exploited, there were hundreds, maybe thousands of men just literally waiting in line, like you said, at the Starbucks drive-thru, waiting their turn to take a chance at exploiting someone else. And it was a very, very sobering experience. And to be clear, the Super Bowl, this is the way I say it, Super Bowl is not the Super Bowl of trafficking. It happens at the Super Bowl, but it happens at Comic-Con and the Sturgis Rally and the PGA Tour. Like you said, anywhere men gather, men with money gather.
Yeah.
You have had just the most fascinating collection of experiences, because this is what I first knew about you. Your caring, compassion, your heart for exploited women, but you didn't stop there. Like, your story touches, like, you intersect with so many of the, how would I put it, the worst expressions of masculinity. You're there, facing them head on. So
right.
I have seen...
Tom.
What's that?
Right back at you. You too.
Well, yeah, but this is why our friendship is so awesome, because we're in it together, but as a woman. So I have I've seen you and I've known you to do this very focused care for survivors of exploitation, whether they're being trafficked or simply have no other choice but to be in that life. So you've done that. But I've been with you on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and I have heard you, I almost said pontificate, but that's not it at all. I have heard you hold court with elected officials and speak with such clarity about the reality of this world to people who are making decisions that could in some ways be life or death. What for you, like in those settings, when you're giving testimony, when you're just meeting with government officials, policy officials, what's the best experience you've had in those settings, and what was for you the most frustrating of those experiences?
Yeah, well, it's been a real honor to be able to get involved in those spaces more. And I think from doing years of outreach and really seeing prostitution in so many different expressions, it does give a sort of more of a weight and authority to speaking with officials. I'm not just giving my own personal opinions or something I read in a book or saw in a film. I'm telling them about the many survivors that I've spoken with, who many of them aren't able to be in those rooms. Many of them are still being exploited. And it's always my hope to represent their voice well and take any opportunity that I get, any table or seat I'm offered. And I'm always at the back of my mind thinking, I want to represent the women that I serve well and be an advocate. And I think from my memory, the first time I really got catapulted into that was in 2019. Washington, D.C. became the first city to have a big hearing on a full decriminalization bill that would include sex buyers and third parties and pimps being decriminalized. And advocates and survivors from across the country flew in to support the local D.C. group testifying. I think there were 180 people who testified on that one day.
Yeah, that was a marathon.
To be a support to those advocates and survivors. I had no plans to speak. I just sat in a corner and was observing the room, and it was very challenging dynamics. For anyone who was there on that day, we kind of say we all trauma bonded on that day in DC. And someone said to me, if you stay till the very end of the day, like 10 p.m., they're often legally required to open it up to anyone with an additional comment. And so I made a few notes in case that happened. And I was the very last speaker of 180 speakers that they allowed to testify. And it's one of those moments. I had a pair of high-heeled shoes from a survivor who'd given them to me for this art project that I did, where I would buy them a new pair of shoes at the moment that they'd be exiting a trafficking situation and do a painting of their old pair of shoes, and it would tell their story. So I had a pair of those shoes in my suitcase from this other training in Kentucky I'd just been to. And I held them up and said, these are the former shackles of someone exploited in the sex trade. And it was one of those moments when you get to speak truth to power. Sometimes you realize like that these people, I shouldn't be intimidated by them. They only have it's a bit of an illusion of power, but to some degrees that they're there sitting in the seats, making the decisions. This council was very disturbed at some of the things that they'd even said. And one of these council members had actually said, if a 16-year-old chooses to be in this work, then that's on them. And I think we should support them in it. And I've heard some listeners.
Was that a woman or a man that said that?
Who was very embroiled in a lot of the full decrim pro-sex work movement, I later found out. But I just spoke the things that were on my heart and wanted to, in every opportunity, it's like, if this is the only speech I ever get to give, I want to give it my best and share these things. I think what's felt frustrating is sometimes you can be in these meetings and you just know that some of these politicians, they are hearing from so many different people on so many issues that everyone cares about their issue. And to be able to present your issue as this is so important and it's life or death for the people that it affects. And I need you to care about this. And so telling stories is much more effective than just giving statistics and sometimes physically taking lawmakers to the places of exploitation. But I feel overall encouraged. I mean, the arc to justice is often long. And I feel in recent years, we've seen a lot of encouraging breakthroughs. And even in the setbacks, like I feel California this year, it's kind of been partly a step forward, but also a step back. We were trying to reclassify an adult purchasing of sex as a felony, not a misdemeanor. And feeling the resistance in some of those meetings was really hard for me. I was like, this is a no-brainer law. Like, can we just set aside partisan politics for 1 minute and just hear what the issue is and not vote according to party lines, but according to humanity lines, like children trafficked and survivors were very hurt by some of the things that were said in some of those meetings. So sometimes it is really hard and frustrating, but then you have a breakthrough and I've seen far more breakthroughs and setbacks in the last few years. So
that's so good. I need to hear that because sometimes they're few and it feels like they're few and far between. So I'm glad to hear you say that. As I have watched kind of your path, your journey in this work, the lane, so to speak, that you started out in has broadened. If I think about your story, it's like it started from wanting to give a rose to one woman you saw to advocating both locally and nationally for those kinds of women, people in those situations. And now it's broader still. Earlier this year, we had Nick Kristof on the podcast, and he kind of let us in a little bit behind the scenes of his article that he did in the New York Times, The Children of Pornhub. You are in the thick of that. Can you fill us in on what was going on? And really more broadly, it's like talk for a little bit about how porn intersects with the subject of sexual exploitation, trafficking. Can you connect the dots for us on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I feel like the last several years, well, for me personally, the first time that I ever made that connection was with a survivor that I was working with in Cambodia who told me that she'd been trafficked from age 11 from a rural village to the city. And she told me that Western men would show her the pornography that they wanted her to reenact. So as an underage trafficked teen, it was the porn-fueled fantasy that was fueling demand. So I always knew coming from early on this work that porn was the marketing fuel behind trafficking, behind demand. And so if you picture a tree, if demand is at the root of the tree of trafficking, pornography is the soil of culture that feeds that and leads a lot of men down that path.
That's so good. Say that one more time.
Yeah, well, we often use this analogy of a tree of exploitation, we call it. We say if you picture the fruit of most heinous cases of child sex trafficking, even if you were able to rescue 20 of the fruit off that tree, more fruit will grow back. Or if you arrest a trafficker and cut off a branch of that tree, another branch is still likely to grow back. While there's still an economic incentive for traffickers to traffic, then trafficking will thrive. And so the trunk of this tree is the system of a sex trade. And what is at the root of that is demand. So primarily men who purchase women and children in the sex trade, but the roots thrive in a pornified soil, and the soil that feeds the roots is pornography. So we began researching. Several members of our team were tasked in doing a lot of research, reading everything under the sun on pornography. And then about 2019, we began noticing these cases in the media, one prominent one being a missing 15-year-old girl in Florida. 58 videos of her exploitation were found on Pornhub, and they'd been uploaded by her trafficker. And then we began seeing these other stories and cases that kind of a similar situation matched. And my boss, Benji, just said, we need to look into this and investigate this and stay on this and not just critique porn as a whole, but talk about what's happening with this specific company. Yeah. How is it possible that a trafficker is uploading videos of an underage girl on what at that time was the most known popular porn site? And what was discovered by our team was that only an email address really was required to upload a video. So they didn't check the age of consent of the uploader or any potential people in the video. And so once we realized that, it was like, oh, that's how the moderation system is woefully negligent. And that's how these videos are being uploaded. And so we wrote, our director of abolition at the time, Lila Micklethwait, wrote an op-ed for the Washington Examiner called "It's Time to Shut Down Pornhub." And she just laid out the case of all the things that she'd found and investigated in those past couple of months. And The very next day, the BBC released a story that they'd been sitting on for months of a story of a 14-year-old girl who'd gone through that exact situation. And so suddenly there was news coverage around the world. Those two articles sparked a real concern. And so we were told, you should start a petition for this. So we started a petition that Lila wrote, and it really quickly went viral. To date, it's had over 2 million signatures. We made an animated video that we just dropped on our Instagram. It blew up. It got over 30 million views. I remember going to a coffee shop that day and all the baristas were talking about the video. And I was like,
oh,
did
wow.
you come out the video on Pornhub? And they were like, yeah. And I said, oh, my organization made that video. And it was just being shared so widely. And so Nick Kristof, he saw the petition, he saw the video, he reached out, he wanted to do his own investigation as well. So we connected him with several survivors, but he found non-consensual content on Pornhub within a few minutes and was so disturbed by that. He's historically written a lot about human trafficking and he did tremendous work in Cambodia. So he began doing this investigative piece. And we just knew, in the David and Goliath story, I just knew that his article was going to be that smooth stone that would hit Goliath right where it needed to.
Yeah.
So it was on the very front page. And because Nick's really well connected with folks like Bill Ackman and the CEO of MasterCard at the time, within a few days, all the major credit cards had cut ties with Pornhub. Pornhub actually released a statement saying this is a smear campaign from organizations such as Exodus Cry and the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. And I screenshotted that. I was like, they just gave us credit for having to delete it was 10 million videos, over 80% of all their content. To date, 91% of the content on Pornhub has had to be taken down that was unverified. And so what I saw as a real cultural shift was people, for the first time, being aware that exploitation was taking place in porn. And I don't think that was really on the collective consciousness of society till that campaign. And now it's very common and permissible to critique porn, to question all manner of ethics within porn. So that was looking at it from the distribution side of things. But we also made a documentary about the exploitation of people who are in porn, like what is taking place on porn sets, both legally and illegally. Even in the legal porn studios, all types of exploitation, coercion, what we would actually legally classify as torture and trafficking was taking place. So we made a 3-part documentary about that called Beyond Fantasy. So just to summarize some of the intersections of porn and trafficking, you have porn fueling demand. We made a documentary called Buying Her, where every single former sex buyer that we interviewed who bought trafficked women and children while they were a sex buyer, it was early exposure to pornography that had led them down that path. So you have porn fueling demand for trafficking. You have real videos of underage and trafficked non-consensual women and children on the distribution side of porn on these websites that are uploaded by users, generated content. Then you have porn that has trafficking and coercion taking place in it on the brick and mortar and the studio-based pornography. And you have pornography being used to groom in so many child abuse cases. We did an Instagram kind of open questionnaire and poll, had over 1,000 individuals contact us, telling us different ways that porn had hurt them. So many cases of, as I was abused as a child, either by another peer, which is sadly something we're seeing on the increase of peer-on-peer child sexual abuse, inspired directly by porn. And we have medical nurses like Heidi Olsen who talk a lot about that. And so if a child is shown pornography, it's shown as this is what grown-ups do, this is what love looks like, this is normal, this is what these sex acts look like. And it's being used in their grooming, used in their coercion. And I just see the porn industry as a predator and exploiter of sorts by neurologically assaulting children through revealing their content. Porn is finding them, even kids who are not looking for porn. That's a huge number of children are stumbling on it.
I keep hearing the average age of exposure, and my oldest grandson is right in that demographic now. And it's so deeply troubling. I cannot understand how anyone really, with a straight face, would try to differentiate porn as something separate from exploitation and trafficking. Though I've seen people try to do that. But in light of, and really a lot of it, for me personally, is the work that you have done that really helped connect those dots. And I'd be curious, what was the number of videos that they had to take down from porn, like 90 million or something like that?
It was around 10 million at that time.
Okay, 10 million. Okay.
One day.
I would be really curious, not that I want to go do this, but I would be really curious how quickly that void has filled back up. Because I think it's so insatiable. And I love the picture that you paint of the soil that just nurtures and perpetuates this. Your journey, I know in the midst of this, we talked one time, this has taken you to some crazy places, to porn convention, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that is where did you bring the roses with you this time? Or
to be a bit more covert than that. So we had little gift bags that had some pearl and gold earrings, some handcrafted art that some artists had made, a card with a phone number for free therapy or free legal advocacy. So that was what we were giving to the female performers in the porn industry. We did it for 2 days around a lot of people don't realize this, but the porn industry has its own version of the Oscars where they give awards to the directors, producers, actors in the porn. But the difference between Hollywood acting and porn acting is that it's not acting sex. It is really having sex. I mean, it's hard for me to even call it sex. It's so exploitative, coercive, transactional, and really damaging for a lot of, we've worked with survivors who have gone to hospital after porn scenes and been recovering for 3 weeks from injuries. So it is real violence. It was two of the most challenging days of outreach I've ever done, because we were at these conventions 8 hours at a time, kind of having to be undercover. So we couldn't be too obvious. We didn't want to create the wrong kind of attention or be escorted out. But the women that we talked with, as soon as we told them why we were there and what we were doing, so many of them started crying, and while they were hugging us, I remember a couple of women saying to me, I don't know why I'm crying. Why am I crying? And they just wanted to talk to us. There was a line of guys wanting to meet their favorite porn star, quote unquote, and the women just wanted to talk with us. And there was a BDSM section that was one of the most disturbing things I'd ever seen, where there were all these leather whips being promoted and merchandised, advertised. And there was a girl in the corner who was being held by, and just, this is a bit of an intense story I'm about to share, I can't remember if it was chains. I think she was just tied up, bent over, and there was a line of men with bunches of different whips in their hands testing out these leather whips on her, and her back was
on an actual human.
And on a real woman. And so I walked past this. I saw that happening, was so aghast, and someone behind the table offered me a leather whip. Do you want to try it out? These are the whips we're promoting. And kind of in a sort of jokey whip. Everyone has their kink and fetish. So if whips are yours, go try it out. And there was a line of at least 10 guys who lined up. And when I tell that story, the looks on people's faces is really horrified. But that kind of content of violence, of women being whipped, beaten, choked, is on porn sites every day and completely normalized in porn. The extreme violence, porn right now has never been more violent and more accessible to as younger children. And
it's not differentiated anymore like it used to be, quote unquote, soft core versus hardcore.
It's not. Softcore porn is what you see on music videos. It's not.
Yeah. So that distinction really has kind of been obliterated in the industry. How long did it take you just personally to kind of recover and regain some equilibrium, having witnessed that as a woman, or as a human, never mind woman, just as a human? What did it take to recover?
Yeah, after any outreach, I mean, to do this work sustainably long term, you have to be very intentional about self-care. And that sounds a little bit like twee, but if you don't properly process trauma, it will build up in unhealthy places in your mind and erupt.
Yeah.
And I don't want to have a breakdown. I don't want to burn out. I want to protect and keep the fire in my heart for this work. And compassion has to be the primary force more than rage or anger. But when you see things, I felt like all day I was being exposed to things that were making me angry. And so I honestly wanted to get that table and turn it over and get the whips myself and go full-blown Jesus in the temple. That was the compassion for justice that was taking place the whole time. And I had to process it. And so I journal a lot. I get all that that rage out on paper. I've talked to therapists at different times, but really trying to reframe it and try and find hope and beauty in the midst of ugliness. And the beauty about doing outreach is that you're not just being exposed to these things making you angry, you're actually being able to be part of the solution and offer hope to women. And you're there on a mission. So it is a little different. But yeah, I think I spent a full day the following day just in a pool, writing, crying, just really like grieving what I saw and praying for the women that we talked to. And then just feeling like it was at the middle of that porn convention. I met a friend and I really prayed, like we had a sort of spontaneous prayer meeting. And it was just a few months after that our campaign against Pornhub really exploded. And we only had 8 people on our team that whole year. And we were campaigning around the clock, calling out Pornhub. And I just know that something really shifted in the conversation. And then we've done this campaign, Protect Children, Not Porn, around age verification. And I was at a meeting in Hollywood undercover when Louisiana became the first state to pass that a year after we started campaigning. And the porn industry was very aggressively wanting to overturn that and was very alarmed at how much money they could be set to lose from not only kids and adolescents not being able to access their site, but they felt that adults would be freaked out. They had to put in a government ID. The
porn companies were upset that they would have to take any steps, any measures to keep kids away from their product. They were upset with that. Yeah. Yours is such a wild journey, but it's like the steps along the way are very consistent with who I know you to be. You and I share a background in Christian faith. We have many similar experiences in church. You have prayed for me. I have prayed for you. We share that in common. But one of the things I deeply respect about you is that has never been a divisive thing for you. I have watched you navigate places where people don't share that. And yet you're a fierce advocate for justice, regardless of where people come from in terms of their church background. What have you learned about being in these spaces as a person who comes with a Christian faith as just part of her makeup and background? Like, what have you learned? Like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah. I think, that is such a deep conversation that would take hours to fully unpack. My introduction in Cambodia was seeing that the women who had gone through the most accelerated healing that I witnessed were women who had encountered the love of Jesus and knew in the deep places of their core that they were loved and known by God, and He'd been able to redeem even the most painful things they'd ever gone through. And so I came into this work with such a lens of hope and knowing that it's this beautiful quote from Corrie ten Boom that there is no pit too deep that God's love isn't deeper still. And so that to me encompasses anyone. Like, I even believe that there's no trafficker who's too far out of the potential redemptive reach of God's love. And that's led me to reach out to some prominent porn directors and see them make some incredible decisions to leave the work that they were doing. And I think this movement is stronger with people who come from so many different backgrounds. And when we were able to frame trafficking as not primarily a moral issue, but a human rights issue or a child's protection issue, I feel like that's the most effective approach. But wherever someone believes or doesn't believe, I grew up in London where the majority of my friends didn't believe in God, and I was seen as that. It's very different culturally to growing up here where that's much more of a common position or a world outlook. So my hope is always to be a faithful witness for Jesus and represent Him well, whether it's on the streets with women, whether it's in political spaces. My faith and love for Jesus is a huge drive of my work in this. It's kind of I can't remember which came first. Is it the Lord that I'm in this work, or I think it is. Would I be doing this work if I didn't believe in God? Maybe, but I don't know how I would sustain it in the way that I have. But most of all, I just want to represent Him and His love well to anyone and everyone. And I think that this issue is one of the most evil, exploitative issues I could possibly think of. And so if you say that you're a friend of God and believe in the power of his love and the importance of justice and mercy, but you're not being his hands and feet or responding. And I love the story of the Good Samaritan. And unfortunately, it was the Levite and the priest who just wanted to get on with the program and do their religious thing at church or at the synagogue, the story. But it was the unexpected hero of the story who actually had their eyes open, were moved with compassion by the person. They got involved in a dangerous situation. They became ceremoniously unclean by touching a bloodied, naked body. But that is what loving our neighbor looks like. And that's the invitation to every person.
We'll be right back after these messages. Did you know we have a new show? Join us in listening to Shop Talk, an extension of the Masculine Wilderness podcast, where your host, Tom Perez, and me, your producer, Lauren Trantham, get together to talk about the behind-the-scenes action that goes on within the anti-trafficking movement, current events, and epic news. It's free to subscribe. Just head on over to our website at epicproject.org and sign up for our newsletter, and you will be automatically opted in to receive these private episodes. See you at Shop Talk. And now, back to the show.
You're someone that I feel like has really modeled, speaking earlier about that tension between justice and mercy and me wanting to overturn the tables in that the work that Epic do, and the tension of justice and mercy that the community of men that you've been raising up, I have so much respect for. And I just want you to know that I know there are many women, both advocates and survivors in this space, that the work of Epic is a constant source of hope and encouragement, not only that sex buyers can be reformed and go on to change their behavior and lives, but that there are men willing to do some of the hardest work in this space, which I believe is working alongside sex buyers or perpetrators, and really holding on to that hope that even those guys, we're holding out hope for them, and we're getting in the trenches and doing the hard work with getting to the heart of where they're at and meeting them where they're at. Yeah. And so just knowing that work is even taking place is such a constant source of encouragement. And so I want to just take the moment to thank you for embodying so much who I know Jesus to be, representing him well. You are a truly incredible witness, not only as a man, but as a follower of the Lord, Tom. So yeah, thank you.
Well, coming from you, that means a lot, because I know your story and I know the depth to which you have taken on this mission as well. To quote another story from Scripture, I feel like the scene where Jesus looked at a crowd and knew they were hungry and said, "We got to feed them." And his disciples are like, yeah. And Jesus looks at his disciples and says, "Well, what do you got that I can work with?" Yeah. And I think it was said sarcastically. I don't know if it was Peter or one of the others, but said, "Yeah, all we got is like 5 loaves and 2 fish." And Jesus's response, and I'm obviously loosely paraphrasing, but I feel like his response was, "All right, I will work with whatever you bring." Mm-hmm. And you'll be surprised at what can happen. And I think in our story with Epic, we have endeavored to bring a message of, like you said, justice and mercy. It's a both and. It's not an either or. We've tried to show up as men in a way that is humble and with great empathy. We've tried, and we have tried all these things. We have failed at these things from time to time, but we've tried to appropriately leverage our unique strength as men in this work. And a lot of times it boils down to simply talking to other men. I think that's the work. That's the work for us to do, is to speak to men. But I think, like I said at the beginning, that's an example of showing up as a better version of yourself as a man. But we never show up in isolation, in a vacuum. We show up with people like you and our friends, the women that are in the trenches with us. We do this together. But I love how, and because I've seen you, I'm aware that your reputation across the spectrum, whether political spectrum, religious spectrum, is like you're in the trenches advocating for what's right and just. And that is, especially in an era where we are so politically polarized, I still believe that we can all agree that vulnerable people ought not to be bought and sold for sex, that vulnerable people ought not to be groomed so that they can later be bought and sold for sex. And that's where so much of the influence of porn is doing some of its most significant damage, both in terms of the boys who will grow up to be the consumers, and the girls, often, not exclusively, but the girls will grow up to be the ones exploited. And yeah, it ought not to be that way. That's how justice was explained to me years ago. A friend just said, it's the way the world ought to be.
Yeah.
It ought to be different. So I appreciate you sharing that. And that's something that we've talked long, hard about that.
And even with, I just think of any mass genocide movements of slavery, it always begins with the dehumanizing of the other. So pornography is that happening digitally, and young boys and girls now being raised to normalize that in dehumanizing and seeing the sex act as something that is very selfish. It's not at all considering the real life of the real person on the other side of the screen. And I think that humanizing others, and that every single person has the opportunity and challenge to do that in their everyday life, and not demonizing people or seeing them as the worst and judging them, but choosing to see the humanity in them and fighting for that and trying to believe what that person could become. And we made this documentary, Buying Her, that it's going to be coming out in January. Finally, we toured around the world and alongside you guys up in Portland, and Justin came to a few of those screenings. And that film was really one of the biggest journeys that our team ever went on. How do we explore and investigate, but not excuse the behavior of sex buyers? Because we believe in accountability, we believe in justice. But we need to humanize these men, not demonize these men. So we try and understand their origin story of how did they get to that place of becoming a sex buyer. We let them make the case for how violent, dehumanizing, entitled the mindset of a sex buyer is, and hear from survivors the violence that they experience. So really addressing the elephant in the room that's often just a side note of, we need to address demand, like this is central to this film. And then concluding with a note of real hope. Like, these are all former buyers who've gone on to become part of the solution, to work with other men who are struggling with shame or struggling with porn. And what a redemptive, hopeful ending to this message. But it's still every person in this space who wants to see justice and accountability. Sometimes our biggest challenge is offering mercy to those who don't deserve it. Yeah. It brings us all to a very equal human level of, am I going to be someone who decides to give someone a second chance, and needs that they could be a different person and a better person. And someone like Jean McConnell is a really powerful example of that, who's spent the next 40 years after being a sex buyer doing advocacy work. And now that his story is the story that I hope for every sex buyer that you guys are interacting on a daily, weekly basis.
Yeah, it is powerful. It's such a powerful statement. You said we need to humanize and not demonize men. That sounds like a monumental challenge when you know what, like, I'm trying to put myself in your shoes. When, if I knew what you know, if I had seen what you've seen, because you've seen things I haven't seen, how hard that would be to humanize and not demonize. Why must we do that?
Because otherwise we become the very thing that we're advocating for, against, And I remember seeing someone actually at this porn convention who was in one of our documentaries, and I felt so much anger. Like, in my mind, this person was a monster. And I remember God really checking me and saying, it's not that you're wrong, but if you demonize this person and see them as a monster, you're almost agreeing with the whole force that fuels this entire industry that dehumanizes. Like, can you see even their humanity? And it was almost more for me, like,
wow.
God wanted to help my heart be protected from becoming so hardened that I was dehumanizing certain others. And it's actually survivors that have taught me that the mercy that they've even shown in forgiving some of their traffickers. I'm like, if you can do that, then what right do I have to not choose mercy or have hope? And so I actually, when I was in Cambodia and I was interviewing all these women in our program, I remember going to the market and seeing this older white guy with a young Cambodian girl. And I felt that same like violent rage. And I'm not a violent person, but I wanted to hurt this person. I was like, I'm either having a panic attack or I'm going to go full blown like rage on this man. I felt revenge was in my heart, and all the stories of women, all their pain. I had just sat with them in the past several months, but it didn't feel like a clean, righteous anger. It felt like a toxic anger, and there is a difference. And I think I will always hold tremendous anger about injustice in my heart, and that feels like a clean and good anger. And that's a flame that all of us in this work, we all carry that flame at all times. But as soon as that flame becomes toxic and hate-filled, and I was scared that I was going to return to England hating men, and actually decided I needed to start doing outreach to sex buyers. This is while I was still in Cambodia. And I knew that there was this one group called Men in the Sex Trade who did outreach to men, but they would only let guys do the outreach. But I managed to persuade their team leader to let me go on the outreaches with them.
Of course you did.
Which I was very grateful for to this day. Yeah. But in the training, they said, if you were doing this outreach just because by stopping demand, you're stopping women being trafficked, that's actually the wrong motivation. You need to do this work with the motivation of you want to see men get free from the things that are binding them, and having compassion for the men, not just a righteous anger. And that was a real motivation challenge that was set before me. And I was speaking on the streets in the red light districts in Cambodia to college guys, to different men. I remember this one man crying in front of me saying, of course, I have to pay a woman to touch me. No woman would ever choose to be with someone like me. I'm the most pathetic, despicable man you could ever dream of. And that was really disturbing to me. And I did feel compassion towards him, just the fact that any person would view themselves in that way. And he let us pray for him. And I almost wanted to offer dignity to him. Like, he lost all of his dignity, and he was exploiting and robbing the dignity of women every day. And I was like, what would it take for his dignity to be restored, so that if he began to see himself as someone worthy to be loved, he would begin then humanizing the women and seeing others as, I don't know. There was just this invitation while I was in Cambodia of this higher way to view people, even those exploiting women. And I'm not saying it's easy. There's still days when it's tough and I have to show up and bring my heart before God again and check I'm doing this work with the right motivations. I think all of us, it's a constant journey, but we want to see redemption. If we don't believe in redemption, then what are we even in this work for? We have to believe that change is possible, culture is possible on a widespread and on an individual basis.
That is... I cannot argue with that. And I feel like I'm sitting with you in that tension, though, to extend that kind of grace to the person who is in the moment of trying to buy sex or exploit another person. Like, they're continuing, that they're allowing that tree to continue to flourish. It's so hard to think about that. But I love the idea of we have to humanize them rather than demonize them. But I can see, if I'm connecting the dots, by humanizing these people, we're hopefully, how can I describe this? I feel like we're teaching them or retraining them to humanize the women that they see. And maybe at some point, if we do that enough, and if we do it more broadly enough, the next generation, or maybe the one behind it, will grow up realizing that these are humans and not things to be bought for our own purpose. It's such a long game. And I said this with other friends that we've had these conversations with. I can't do this by myself. We can't do it by ourselves at Epic. We need friends that are in the trenches with us. So,
Reverend Tom.
Reverend Helen, I appreciate it. I want to give you the last word, but I want to ask if you would give a benediction like we learned in church when we were kids. Give a benediction to the men that are listening to this.
Oh, gosh. Well, I would just say to every man and every brother of mine, whether you're a young man or an old man, that the small things you do and choose to do really make a difference. And just as my father sowed that seed of humanizing and taking action, may that be something that each of you endeavor to do in your own lives in the small ways and the big ways, while knowing that the small ways often turn out to have a ripple effect in big ways. And I think as women, we are stronger together. As allies doing this work, the forces behind prostitution are taking connection between men and women and distorting it in some of the most devastating ways possible. And so I believe the opposite spirit, if you will, in this work, and some of the most powerful allyships demonstrated are when us as sisters work alongside you, our brothers. We want to do that, and it's our joy to do that. And I'm stronger in this work because of brothers such as Tom and Justin and all of you men who are listening. And so let us continue to join forces, do this work, this all-important mission that affects both men and women, doing it with strength and endurance, and most of all, hope and joy.
Amen. Helen, you are a blessing. Thank you for taking this time today. Appreciate you so much.
Appreciate you, and love this podcast. Love that we're hearing more from the inner workings of Tom and the incredible questions that you ask. So thank you for not only the work that you do, but for the man that you are and the man that I get to call friend.
Thank you. Just stop now, okay?
Thank you for listening to the Masculine Wilderness Podcast with your host, Tom Perez. This podcast is a production of Epic Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to disrupting the demand for commercial sexual exploitation and dismantling the forces that perpetuate it. I'm your producer, Lauren Trantham. Special shout out to our favorite logo designer, Michelle Boucher, as well as Wes Finley, who crafted and donated our amazing theme song. Interested in sponsoring an episode? Send us an email at podcast@epicproject.org. That's podcast@epikproject.org. As a nonprofit organization, your donations allow us not only to produce this podcast and change the conversation around sexual exploitation, but also to manage our many programs, such as buyer intervention, teen prevention, and community education. Your support also allows us to support survivors of exploitation and more. To learn more about our work and to donate, visit www.epicproject.org. Once again, that is www.epikproject.org. Most importantly, this podcast would be nothing without you, the listener. Thank you for tuning in, subscribing, and sharing this episode with your friends and loved ones. Thank you for your commitment to learning more about the issues that affect our most vulnerable populations. Thank you for navigating this masculine wilderness with us. See you next episode.